so utterly unique.
He was just a charming sort of person who did really like people. He was very genuine, very down to earth.
And one day I saw Leo at Pioneer Market, and I said, Leo, I can't find my Moimoi book. And so he goes, just wait here. So a while later he comes back and he brings me the book. I looked at it and he had autographed it to me personally, and it says, to Mary, now Moimoi.
My dad realized how much autographs meant. I used to send my cards away to get them autographed. So I think a lot of that had to do with he understood what an autograph, how personal it is.
I really enjoyed him coming home and showing us what he saw during the day and what he was sketching and what he got excited about.
We would come to Olvera Street every Saturday and look and look and look and look until I finally found him. It was so hard to talk to him that first time. He was drawing the most beautiful drawing of a young girl in costume. It was the blessing of the animals. I couldn't even speak.
He meant so much to me as a father, not as anybody famous. I just think his body of work is incredible, and I want to share it with the world.
It's about the art. If the art touches your heart, then it's good. It doesn't matter who did it, what it was. He had no ego. It's about what his art could do to that person. Nothing more, nothing less.
So Leo Politi was an artist who loved to draw children, who loved to draw people, who loved nature, who loved birds, flowers, animals.
And that started in Italy when he went to school. He got a scholarship from this University of Art, and it was his mother that kind of talked him, you should do it, and he won. And it was like a palace, the university. You didn't live at home, you lived in, and they had even a zoo. And at the zoo was one of the sketching teachers taught them how to sketch from the zoo, from the animals. And his whole thing, it's not like taking a picture, it's like capturing the soul.
When he went to art college in Milan, he was very torn as to what he wanted to do with his art. And he was fascinated with puppets. It wasn't the only thing he was fascinated with. He'd spent some time in London, loved chalk art. But puppets particularly, he thought he might become a puppeteer at one time, because he liked to whittle, make little figures with wood. So it was just one of the many directions that his art went in.
One of the picture books that Leo Politi created was Little Leo, which was somewhat autobiographical. It begins in Fresno when his family was ready to move back to Italy, which I think was about 1915. He opens the book with he's on the farm, and it shows him riding a horse, and he seems to be quite happy and content. And once he gets to Italy, there's a very cute illustration that I just love. It's little Italian kids peeking in the window looking at Leo sitting at the table with his grandma and grandpa.
I came on the train today, and it made me think about when my mom and dad came to Los Angeles when they were very young and they didn't know where they were going to go or where they would stay or anything. They came from Fresno, and I do believe they just went to Union Station across the street and they saw the church. And my mom asked my dad, said, I'd like to go in there and pray. So she went in and prayed, and my father with his sketch pad started wandering and wandered across the street and found Olvera Street. That was where, and they stayed. That was their start here on Olvera Street. He would go out every day and sketch. He loved sketching from life.
And he would come home in the evenings, continue painting. He would paint until 3 in the morning, and then go to bed.
Politi was a gentle man who, he says himself, loved the warmth and happiness of family life.
He had this ugly yellow formica table in the kitchen, and my dad would sit at that table and we would all be there, and he would use the table as a palette. He would draw and he would mix paint on the formica table. It was just normal. I mean, we didn't really watch him. We just we were there, and life went on around him, and he did his thing and we did our thing. And he would just be creating these masterpieces, but nobody thought about that.
Well, I think the thing about Leo Politi is that he saw everyone as equals.
As he got into the children's books, he realized that children's books at that time was Dick and Jane, and wasn't and my dad had whole different ideas. He wanted to show all different cultures.
He did enjoy that Mexican culture, and I think he had learned a little something about it when he was taking a boat from Italy to the United States. He passed through some of the South American countries, and he really started feeling an attachment to the bright colors and some of those aspects of the culture. And so I think by the time he got to Los Angeles and he settled and he discovered Olvera Street, it was perfect for him. For some while, he earned a little money, I think maybe a quarter per portrait, sketching people who visited Olvera Street. But it was really the children that he enjoyed sketching.
The stories are so wonderful, and he was so far ahead of his time in writing about minority children. I mean, it was something like 15 to 20 years before anyone else did that. So he was very innovative.
Through his artwork, he preserved children, their neighborhood, their cultures. For instance, Moi Moi was a very real person, she and her three brothers, and he captured their culture of the Chinese New Year in his books in watercolor.
At that time, we didn't know he was actually, doing a book about our family. I just know he was sketching, pictures of a lot of the kids playing around and their parents owned stores in Chinatown.
Chungking Road is a pedestrian walkway where there's no cars. So we would have kids from all over coming down to play in Chinatown. We'd play tag, we played red light, green light, and that's how we did is play. So to me, Chinatown was a really enjoyable time of my life there.
It was kind of amazing because when he actually presented the book to us, some of the stuff that he put in there was pretty close to what we did. And he knew we went to Chinese school, so that's why there's a page in there where he had us writing calligraphy with brush. I think somehow he knew Frankie was involved in doing the lion dance, and so that got into the book somehow.
My first memory of Leo was him, we had a bench right in front of our store, and he would sit on the bench. I drew up the nerve to ask him what he was doing. He says, "Oh, I'm just drawing." And he put a sketchbook down and we started just talking, and I asked a little bit about my family, and at that age I says, "Well, my name is Frankie. My name is Frankie." That's all I could really tell him. And then I started playing with him actually, and he was really acceptable playing with me. I mean, and it was to a point where every time he came, that became a normal request. Is, "Hey, give me a horsey ride," and he would do it. So.
What I do remember is when he did come to visit, he'd come and bring his dog and allow us to give him peanuts from the vending machine. And I think that's also where he might have gotten the part in the book where I would give the orange to the lion. So just the little things that we might have just done in the everyday meeting up with Leo, he picked us up maybe with the story.
The children would just crowd around him and call him artist, artist. And he gave them paper. He let them borrow his paint box. He only had a plain child's paint box. He never had anything more elaborate. It's amazing what he did with that paint box.
I think that realizing what he was doing is like, wow, this guy was really ahead of his time in what he was trying to do. And it's made me appreciate a lot of what he did, not knowing what he was doing back that time. So I really look up to him now.
We were honored to be the subject of his book. So that's why when people ask me like, oh, isn't it so special? I always think Leo's the one who's the special person.
A lot of people aren't aware of his preservation efforts, even though I think they're present in his picture books. In fact, he did several picture books during this preservation period when he was sketching the Victorian homes, which included Emmett on Bunker Hill and Mieko and several others.
I think his imagination never stopped working through all his children's books. And then when he finally finished, he was always very aware of the city and what was going on. And he could see more and more concrete, and it was very distressing to him. And so that's when he decided to write the adult books to save the buildings, save the festivals. So he was quite a historian. And the thing that I found so impressive, when I read his descriptions of the houses, I realized he really was a very talented writer, because you knew the people in the house when you read the paragraph about it. It was very, very, very impressive. So it was just like another dimension of getting to know him, really.
My father loved Los Angeles. He loved the beauty of the old buildings. He loved the communities and the houses. It broke his heart when they started tearing down the Bunker Hill homes. And he spent a lot of time going there and talking to the people, talking to the tenants, talking to the owners, and did whatever he could to help them, but it was really hard. He also loved parks. He loved all the green space of the city of Los Angeles. We used to go to the games together, my father and I. We were both Dodger fans. And his idea was that the better they did, the more famous they got, the bigger the parking lots would have to be, the more parks that they would tear down. And so he started listening to the game, hoping they would lose.
And so when they said you ought to make a book, he didn't just take all the pictures and make a book. He went out and researched every picture and who lived it, who built it, because that's the soul. My dad he never took it, he did things the easy way. When he did a carving, he always used a knife and a chisel. He never used, some of them they used chainsaws and this and that. No, he did it, that's just the way my dad was.
My father felt like that they should embrace the old and turn it into something they could use for everyday modern, but not tear it down and not destroy the historical parts of Los Angeles. He tried to save what he could in his artwork for people of the future to be able to see the beauty of the past.
And he thought if you could change a person's heart, you could change their mind. You see, because people are not had to soften. They had to be more understanding. They had to be more loving. They had to be more, and his whole thing was to touch a person's heart, you could change their mind.
If he had succeeded in what he was trying to do, this Bunker Hill, downtown LA, would have been a beautiful area with beautiful mansions.
Two editors had wandered down Olvera Street, two editors from New York, and they were both very taken with his sketches. And so the one, Alice Dalgleish, gave him a lot of books to illustrate. So he didn't just do his own work, he did work for other people. And the other one, whose name I never learned, gave him assignments too. So he had a lot of support in the printing world, I think.
And Alice Dalgleish, who was a royalty to Scribner's. And at that time they had Ernest Hemingway. They were a big publisher. Her and my mom, I think, are the two most important women in my dad's life. In the very beginning, he got a lot of jobs from the textbook companies, from the publishers, and illustrated textbooks. And those first books he illustrated were textbooks. And then after that, he started doing children's books. She gave my dad contracts. Every contract of every book was a book. It was not like the contracts everybody else had. He had all the rights in the world. He was just a street artist, but she knew that he was special.
Juanita, which was set in Olvera Street, or Pedro the Angel of Olvera Street, was also set on Olvera Street. Captured the Blessing of the Animals, a very favorite event of his, and also La Posada, set at Christmas time. We went down there because he talked about it so often. He clearly was very, very fond of this particular event. My son, who was about 5 at the time, took his mouse. He made a hit with that mouse. They asked him, well, so why did you bring your mouse to be blessed? And he said something along the lines of, well, Charles, that was his mouse's name, Charles's behavior hasn't been that good lately, so I thought maybe this would help. Well, of course it didn't, but it was a very cute moment. It was filmed by the media, and we enjoyed it. And had it not been for Politi, we wouldn't have been there.
Every year he'd come down to the blessing. Oh, that was a big day for him, the blessing of the animals, and sketch. He just loved the animals and the children and everything that it represented, and worked on the mural for months and months. It was a long project, and I think it's just so incredibly beautiful.
Arnie Nixon was a professor at Fresno State, and he was also a sought-after storyteller. He offered weekend workshops, and what he did was he brought in authors and illustrators, sometimes very well-known ones, sometimes people who were new to the field, and he introduced them. And Leo Politi was a favorite. So that is how I got to know him. And the significance of those weekend workshops is that that is where the community got to know Leo Politi.
If my dad ever had a twin, it was Arnie Nixon. My dad and Arnie Nixon were like they were really good friends. And I really wasn't until when my dad died and I met Arnie Nixon and I heard some of the he told stories unbelievable. He really understood my dad. He understood what made my dad tick, you see, because he was just a wonderful human being himself, you see.
One of the things that he did, he was interested in children's literature, of course, and he taught future teachers, but he also collected children's books. So he had amassed a collection of some 22,000 books that he donated to the Fresno State Library, which was the basis for the Arnie Nixon Center for the Study of Children's Literature. And the artwork in the Leo Politi garden really makes it feel like there's a part of Politi in there. It includes one sculpture, which is a girl reading a story to a boy, and a dog is listening on. Of course, only Politi would have a dog listening on to the story, very typical Politi. And there was what was a bird bath from his own yard with a girl with her arms raised and birds flying overhead. And then there's some mosaic tiles which actually ended up being replicated. They are not the original ones, but there's a dog and there's a cat, and then there's many birds and flowers, all very typical Politi.
My dad was invited all over the country, but really the only place I remember was that he would come and talk is Fresno. He loved Fresno. Fresno was home for him. There was a magnet that brought him back because of all the people in Fresno that I've met through the library, through the university, they're just unbelievable people. They know more stories about how my mom and dad got mad, and they tell us stories about my dad, you see, and my mom, and they're just wonderful.
Well, this is a very special library, and it quickly became one of the busiest branch libraries in Fresno County. We did lots of programming, and of course Leo Politi was our patron saint, you might say. And when we opened the branch that first day, we all went to dinner together, and he had stacks of his lithographs that he was selling to the staff and autographing them, and I still have mine on my wall at the house. I remember very well the day that Leo Politi brought the mural into the library. He drove up in his van with it tied to the top of his car and brought the pieces down, and he was a very practical guy. He just stood on a chair or a ladder with his tools, and they affixed the pieces of the mural to the wall. Everybody gathered around and really enjoyed it.
When my dad died, and they had a big celebration in Los Angeles for my dad, and everybody got up and said things about my dad. Before that, all the kids that he used to sketch in costume, they all danced and everything. It was an amazing celebration. And my dad, just so people know, his ashes are across the street at Olvera Street. There's a tree named after my dad, and that's where we decided to put the ashes. Now, I was the last one to talk because my sister said, I want you to talk. And so before I even said anything about my dad, I said, first of all, we have to remember my mom, because my mom was really the one that made it all happen. If it wasn't for my mom, my dad could have never do the things that he did. She made it so that he didn't have to think about anything. He could just concentrate on what he did. And what he did was very important. But what she did was she held the fort down.
Mom was the foundation of our family, and she knew how much my father loved his work. I mean, it was his life. And so she always had the home. She took care of everything. So all he had to do is just do what he loved to do.
My dad turned down Walt Disney. They wanted to buy the book Pedro, and my dad wouldn't do it. And we were poor. But any other mother might have said, you could have this and that if your dad wasn't so selfish about his poor Pedro book, you see. And it really wasn't until she got very, very sick. I always thought that my mom would be taking care of everybody, but he took care of my mom. And that was like, for my father to stop what he was doing and take care of my mom, And even the school that was named after him, he didn't have time. He put her first, and that was the most important thing.
She loved his work. She loved what he did. She respected what he did. He was able to do what he did because of her.
I told him, my mom was the wind beneath my dad's wings.
Artist Leo Politi lived on Bunker Hill and captured its dying days in his painting.
I lived right where Music Center is, and it was on Cart Street, Cart and Grand. And at that time, when I first moved on the hill, the smaller houses and property, you could buy them for $500, the whole thing. I was living in a Victorian house, but a simple one. There was scattered all around simple Victorian houses, and then some, great structure built by people that had money. But the great floods that came from the Los Angeles River inundated, so the people, they began to build their homes on the hill. Old-timers remember the magnificent home on Bunker Hill's brightest days.